everyone and welcome back. Today we are talking about the new Candyman movie, now available to rent on video on demand. And this movie is the definition for A for effort. I mean, they really tried their best. So how do you modernize a cult classic? The answer is you do not. And the first time I watched this film, I felt very let down by it. My reaction was kind of like, I didn't know what to say or how to say it. And I think the main reason this movie just wasn't as great as it could have been is because it didn't really focus on Yahya's character Anthony, and he didn't really get a chance to be as great as I wanted him to be. Like, there were so many moments, but it just wasn't enough. Because if you recall in the original film, like, Helen was the main character. And so by the time Candyman is introduced into the film, they do such a great job of investing you in this woman's sort of obsession of getting to the bottom of this story. And this sort of obsession is not paralleled in Anthony's character, right? Like, we don't really get to see him descend into madness, which I would have loved to see. We don't get to see how his obsession kind of gets deeper and deeper and deeper. And because of that sort of lack of focus, the movie is a total miss. And the second main reason I don't think this movie worked very well is because there was just too many main characters on screen. If you remember the original, like, everything about Helen's character, like, everything was supporting, right? Like, whether it be Bernadette, who got a shout out, like her best friend, her cheating husband, like, they didn't feel like random storylines. Like, they didn't feel like they were just kind of going off on their own. Like, they were all there to support Helen's character. So again, when you get to the ending, you feel like you really went into the fire with Helen because that's how deeply immersed you were with her. And in the new Candyman movie, there were just a lot of characters that didn't need to be there. There's a lot of scenes that didn't really add to either the characters or to the storyline itself. So it was really hard to follow really what I wanted to follow, which is Anthony's sort of like this lead up to the final scene, right? Because that could have been super brilliant and it just doesn't have the emotional impact that it was supposed to have. Okay, so before I go into details about opportunities for improvement in this film, let's talk about what I loved. I loved Nia DaCosta's direction. It was really beautiful. It was well made. There was a lot of ideas here that could have been great. Like, I really liked the idea of the Candyman being an actual Candyman. Like, that could have been a great introduction, to this whole urban legend. Like, there was a lot of potential there. Instead, they kind of beat it to death, And the casting. This is what was very frustrating about this movie. It felt like they had all the ingredients, but they just, the timing was off. It's like you had everything you needed to be great. Why weren't you great, right? And let's start with the main reason why I don't think this movie was as great as it could have been, and that's Anthony. Yahya's character, Anthony. Anthony, for me, was amazing. Like, Yahya played him beautifully. There were so many moments here where, like, his mannerisms, just his expression, like, it was spot on. It was really spot on. Like, if you think back to the first murder, like, and he's kind of like, the bees are around him. There's a mirror scene where he can't even see himself anymore. Like, these things could have been great. And I think where it kind of missed the mark, like, there's a few reasons why it didn't hit. First, the idea of Anthony as an artist. I think he should have been an already established artist, and Candyman should have been his next project. I think that would have been far more interesting. Like, I would have loved to see him from the beginning kind of researching Candyman, really kind of getting into the story of it. Instead, even the way they introduced the urban legend is just so sudden. And just a side note, if you haven't seen the first movie, this movie doesn't actually make any sense. And even then, it still doesn't really make any sense, but like, it's introduced and you're just like, whoa, go back. So I would have liked to see them kind of take their time with that and really give him the chance, because a lot of information is just thrown at us and there's not enough time to kind of sit and be with it. Also, his relationship to Colman Domingo's character, like, that was a wasted opportunity. I mean, here you have somebody who has a first-hand account of the Candyman, and seeing them kind of go back and forth would have been interesting. Seeing him, possibly discourage Anthony from pursuing this any further. Instead he kind of just comes up to him in a laundromat, and I'm just like, I wish they had more time together, because the times he was in it, he was captivating, but again, it just was not consistent enough for me. And finally, the other reason why I feel like Anthony's character didn't have the impact that it had is because of this love story. I think as individual characters, they worked well. But I was not invested into Anthony and Brianna's character as a couple. Like, they didn't make, there was no connection for me as a couple with them. I think it would have been far more interesting if they were meeting for the first time, or they were kind of coming together for the first time. Then you have that kind of love story aspect, which I think would have made the story a lot more dynamic, you know what I mean? And we could talk about Brianna, because as a standalone character, she's very, very interesting, but there is so much kind of left unpacked about her, and there's so much information about her life that is not fully fleshed out, right? Like, her father commits suicide. We don't really know what that's about. She's trying to break into the art world, and she gets this opportunity because of all these grisly murders that kind of happen in the vicinity, you know, literally, you know, within her vicinity. So she's kind of getting these opportunities, and I think it would have been far more interesting to watch her alone and then kind of come together with Anthony. Because even this commentary on art, like, there's a lot of social commentary in the movie, but they're so ill-placed, right? Like, with the art commentary, and specifically with Brianna's sort of ambition to have her own, you know, studio, and it's such a world where it's like you have to wait your turn, right? Like, people don't like the irony. It's like you like something different, just not without your permission. And so there was a lot of opportunity there for commentary in a subtle way, you know, with Brianna's character. She kind of has this tension with some of the people in the art world. Like, there's a scene that kind of mirrors the original Candyman, but it doesn't hit the same because you're not sure if these art people are naturally pretentious or, you know, like, it doesn't connect, right? So you don't really get a sense of what she's fighting for or against. And so this was quite frustrating for a lot of reasons. And the last reason this movie didn't really hit as hard as it really could have is the horror aspect of it. Like, there was no horror here. It was just kind of like a social commentary, and it was so thrown in your face, and everything was so black and white, quite literally, that there's no nuance, right? Like, no one is good and no one is all bad, right? Like, we're all good and we're all bad. So to kind of make it so, like, have such a clear line, it was kind of insulting to the audience's intelligence, right? Like, it's like I was really rooting for this movie, and it wouldn't let me. And in terms of the horror, they failed on two aspects. First, the Candyman myth, they sort of say it 5 times, and Anthony's physical transformation. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that this entire movie should have been focused on Anthony, and everybody should have been supporting that. So let's talk about the Candyman, the same Candyman 5 times. Like, this idea should be, like, you know, terrifying, right? Like, you say Candyman 5 times and this guy comes out and just kills you. And the way this movie kind of structures it, it just becomes, like, really funny, you know? And a lot of that has to do with the fact that this information was introduced way too early into the film, right? Because right off the bat, like, he kind of has an exhibition about Candyman, right? Like, that shouldn't have been the case. Like, this should have been a new project he was working on, and at the end kind of introduced this Candyman 5 times, because by kind of baiting people to say Candyman 5 times, first it loses its sort of, it loses its wonder, you know, it loses its kind of, like, you know, it loses the feeling. And the second thing is there's no way around it. If you say Candyman 5 times, you have to die. And so the amount of people dying, specifically at that, you know, high school, it just turns into, like, Area 51. Like, it just turns into, like, you need the US Army. Like, this doesn't make sense anymore. Like, you're beyond police investigations. Like, you're beyond anything logical at this point, because nobody can explain this shit anymore. And so the Candyman 5 times, again, a lot of that has to do with how the story of Candyman is introduced. It's introduced way too soon into the film. And again, as Anthony, as an artist, like, we should have been seeing that. And well, I'll go into that with the body transformation. Like, the body transformation could have been really effective, right? Like, he has this small bite and it's kind of getting bigger and bigger. And I think it should have been more of a metaphor. Like, it would have been cool if he could see it, but, like, nobody else could see it. Because there's a certain point where he goes to the hospital and it doesn't really make sense. It's like, why are you at the hospital? You, like, nobody has a reaction to it. You know what I mean? People are just like, please just hide it and go away. And this physical transformation kind of creeps up on us suddenly, because again, there's a lot of beautiful moments with him. Like, you know, he's creating his art pieces, and you know, when you see them, like when Brianna's character walks in and she sees what he's working on, like it's actually quite terrifying. And so if we could have seen that process, you know what I mean? If we could have seen him kind of like changing and painting these things and, you know, like slowly losing his reflection in the mirror. Because again, like there's a mirror scene that I think is really nice, but it doesn't hit because, again, it feels like we're popping in on Anthony changing rather than following him as we did Helen into like this obsessive, like, you know, descent into nothing. So again, the physical transformation had the opposite effect. Mostly, it just became gross. It wasn't scary. And for that reason, it just didn't work. And so we get to the climax, and I actually thought there was a lot of really good ideas here, but they weren't executed. And the reason they weren't executed is because of this buildup, right? Because if you remember in the original movie, like by the time Helen gets into the fire, you really feel like you went into the fire with her because so much time was spent building her character and sort of the story of Candyman, right? So in the end, you're like, and it leaves a lot up to the imagination. Whereas by the time you get to the end of this movie, you feel like there was just, you were kind of being pulled in different directions. And again, that has to do with the lack of focus. And by lack of focus, I mean, with each character, like they were trying to flush out different facets of each character, right? Like Anthony's an artist, but he's also a boyfriend, and he's also like this, like they were trying to pull out too many things, right? With Brianna, she's a daughter, she's also a curator. Like they were trying to pull out too many facets of all these characters that it ended up being a waste of time. And so although we did get to know these characters, we didn't get to connect with them, which was very odd and unusual. And this final scene could have been brilliant, right? Like it could have been really something, but even the lead up to it was very bizarre. Like the way Brianna was kidnapped, the way she was sitting there, she escaped. Like, again, you have another unexplainable massacre. This is beyond police at this point. Like you need the US Army, you need scientists. Like this doesn't make sense anymore. This is like, again, like Area 51 shit. Like there's no logical explanation for this. And because everyone can see the Candyman, it just makes it even more perplexing that like this is beyond myth at this point. Like this is like, you need the Avengers. Like it doesn't really make any sense anymore. So I think overall, there were some very good ideas in this that could have been great. And where they failed was Yahya's character. I think it's a damn shame. I think he could have been great if they just let him be great and just focused on him. Because this could have been like an Oscar-worthy performance. Because if you really watch the movie again and you watch the moments that he's in it, you know, his reactions to things, his eye movement, like he's excellent. And I would have really loved to see his descent, right? Like his annihilation. I would have loved to see him painting. I would have loved to see him slowly losing his reflection in the mirror. Like this would have been horror, right? Instead, they kind of gave screen time that to people that didn't add to the movie and didn't really add to the story. And it seemed like, I get it, they were trying to pay respect to the old Candyman, but it just felt like a waste of time, right? You're like, you need to build up. Like everything about this movie should have been building up to the end. And instead you just felt like, oh, you could have been great. So what I would say is if this was on Netflix or on HBO Max or you already had a subscription, then yeah, I would watch it. Would I pay, you know, to watch it? No. So if you're thinking about renting it, I would just say wait till it comes on Netflix or on HBO or wherever it is it's going to stream at some point. But overall, like there were so many ideas here, and man, I never wanted to like a movie so badly in my life, right? And I think Yahya was their key, and they kind of like, they fumbled it with him. And that's how I can articulate why it didn't work for me. So you guys let me know what you think. You know, tell me what you liked, what you didn't like. Maybe you thought Yahya was a very dislikable character, and that would have been fine. You know, he could have been dislikable, and they should have just committed to that dislike. It was more like we didn't get a chance to see the process. Anyways, you guys let me know what you think, and until next time.